Welcome to Module 3, where we'll be focusing on salsa. But before we get to salsa, we need to take a detour back to bolero, because both styles of music have undergone a similar process of transformation. In the previous module, we went from the Caribbean to Mexico and the rest of Latin America. Crossing the Gulf of Mexico became a romantic journey that soon acquired religious and social undertones. We witnessed how bolero became much more than a way to channel romanticism and sentimentality. It was the music of the emerging middle class, people who were looking for ways to express their individuality and overall their capitalist aspirations. Everything was about me, me, me. The romantic discourse from the 19th century was the perfect vehicle. However, as we discussed, Agustin Lara, the virtuoso Mexican composer, added new elements and began questioning the social role of romantic music. His songs question those institutions, the state, the church, and family, that are the gatekeepers of individual and social morality. But the sentimental discourse never went away. And that's what ended up prevailing. Well, that's what we still hear most of the time. A music that repeats over and over an extremely limited repertoire of emotions. Let's blame poetry for that. 19th century Spanish sentimental poetry and early 20th century modernist poetry make up the foundation of bolero lyrics, and to a certain extent, tango. Any individual love experience is touched by a few poetic cliches and is therefore turned into an aesthetic, emotional journey that millions of people share and can identify with. It's a simple formula that works. Before bolero, modernist poetry had become politically engaged, questioning what was happening in many Latin American countries in the first decades of the 20th century, specifically the overpowering influence of the United States. However, what ended up prevailing was a type of modernist poetry that went back to the 19th century Romanticism, to a point that many poets were repeating the same cliches. That's the kind of poetry that influenced bolero and later on salsa. To understand salsa, not only are we going back to Romanticism, but also to the same Cuban city where bolero was born, Santiago de Cuba. You see, we come full circle. In fact, a great deal of Latin American music can be traced back to Santiago de Cuba, a city in the eastern part of the country. Although salsa wasn't developed in Santiago as a music style, that's where its melodic essence comes from, in the form of style that many people around the world are familiar with. That style is son, made famous by the film Buena Vista Social Club, which you might remember. We'll come back to that later on. Like tango and bolero, salsa is the result of many influences, mainly Spanish and African. Cuba's location in the Caribbean makes it the ideal place because after the arrival of the Spanish, it became the port of entrance for both European and African cultures. From there, colonization, commerce, and cultural influences spread to the rest of the continent. Salsa was not the exception. However, unlike tango and bolero, salsa traveled north, not south. Its journey took it to the United States, where it became an industry. So, amigos, welcome to another musical journey that started once again in the Caribbean.